55 years ago, when Walter Ehlers crossed this beach, it was anything but a quiet stroll. Ehlers was a staff sergeant when he and his brother hit the Normandy beaches on D-Day. Both had fought side by side in North Africa and Sicily, but the Army decided to split them up for the massive European invasion. His brother never made it off the beach.
It was in July when they finally came and notified me that he was killed actually on D-Day when his ship landed. And he and his whole squad were wiped out in one blow. They said, some people said it was an 88, some people said it was mortars. They don't know what it was, really.
Ehlers and his older brother joined the Army in their home state of Kansas in 1940. Walter was too young to enlist, but his mother tearfully agreed to sign for him if he would pledge to be a Christian soldier.
When I was in the service, there's so many times when you are tempted to do things you know you shouldn't do. I could still see my mother's tears, and I didn't want to dishonor her, and above all, I didn't want to dishonor God.
Ehlers had no idea when he left his family's farm that he was destined to become one of the war's most honored heroes. When he learned he was to be decorated, Ehlers said he was just doing his job. But the Congressional Medal of Honor he received is the highest military decoration conferred by our nation for deeds of extraordinary courage and bravery, at risk of life, above and beyond the call of duty. There are living Medal of Honor recipients from 3 past wars: Vietnam, Korea, and World War II. If you ask any of them, they'll likely echo Ehlers' words and say they were just doing their jobs. And some will also quickly acknowledge that God was with them during their experiences.
I have no excuse for being here. There's no excuse in the world. If it hadn't been that the Lord, as I say, was saving me for later duty.
For me in combat, my faith was a substitute for fear. It gave me confidence to do things that for me would have otherwise been impossible.
Prior to combat, I was practicing to be a Christian. And in combat is when I became a practicing Christian.
But I thought if I could just save one more man, it'd be worth getting wounded over. So I just kept praying, Lord, please help me get one more. And he did until I got all my men off.
When I reached out and just said, God, I need you, I knew that he knew me, and I knew that he was there.
You know, I knew I had Mother back praying, and I knew I had my daddy praying, and I knew everybody at Second Presbyterian Church in Chattanooga was praying.
I found prayer to be one thing that sustained me all through the war.
My prayer wasn't that God made me a great hero or that I became a John Wayne annihilated enemy. It was that I would have the courage to get out of that hole and do what was right, and that I die like a man.
I told my troops, I said, all I want you to do, fellas, is have your machine guns ready. Pray, 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 and don't give up.
When I go back to the beaches at Normandy, I look at the beach and I see it as a beautiful beach, and it's calm. When we got ready to make the landings in Normandy, we came in on Omaha Beach, and it was a real mess. We hit a sandbar, so we went into water up to our necks, and so we had to wade ashore and that. Then the first thing the guys wanted to do was lay down on the beach, and I told them that they couldn't lay down on this beach. We had to get out of there immediately, that we had to get across the beach or we'd all get killed. the best thing I ever did was to get those 12 men off the beach without a casualty. And I can still remember that, and I can still remember seeing all these bodies on the beach. I can see all of that just as plain as day. I prayed a lot. My mother always prayed for us, and every letter we got, she's always had her prayer usually at the end of the letters, or some praise thing, you know, that she was praying for us, and she did a lot of praying for all of us. She had 3 boys in the war. And then, of course, when I go up to Colville Cemetery, I can remember so many people that gave their lives there on the beaches and in Normandy itself. You look at that and you just can't believe how many lives were sacrificed. It's hard to see so many people die, and you have made it yourself. When I go back to that cemetery, it's like part of my life is there. Because there's so many of my friends that are buried there. I go because I want people to remember, and I think that we should remember these people who made these supreme sacrifice for us here.
Ehlers' Medal of Honor action began 3 days after D-Day, and 23 miles inland from the Normandy beaches, in and near the hedgerows. After eliminating a German patrol, he crawled forward under fire, scattered the enemy mortar section, and destroyed 2 machine gun nests. The next day, Ehlers and his men were blocked on 3 sides as the enemy brought in reinforcements. With bullets whizzing all around him, he stood and fired in a semicircle, allowing his squad to withdraw. The French countryside where he fought with such valor all those years ago is peaceful now, but Ehlers remembers.
I was only doing my job, but my men apparently liked what I was doing, and they wrote affidavits and they wrote me up for the Medal of Honor.
Ehlers received his Medal of Honor and a promotion to 2nd lieutenant. After a 30-day leave, he returned to fight with his men, where he was wounded in Germany. Today, as he revisits the battlefield of so long ago, he still doesn't think of himself as a hero.
To me, my brother was the true hero, and he was my hero, you know, because he paid the supreme sacrifice for us being here today. So that's my hero.
Within a year of Pearl Harbor, Mitchell Paige was on a ship off Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, waiting to go ashore in the first major Pacific ground offensive of World War II. He had joined up in 1936 and was a platoon sergeant in charge of machine gunners when he left home in Pennsylvania for the 200-mile walk to the Marine recruiting station in Baltimore. His mother packed a sack lunch and gave him some advice he never forgot.
As she handed me the bag, she hugged me and kissed me, and she says, "Son," looked me right in the eyes, and she says, "Son, all I want you to do is trust in God. Don't try to figure out everything by yourself, and God will show you the way."
When the Marines waited ashore at Guadalcanal, there was little opposition. But later, Paige and his platoon would play a key role in turning back an overwhelming number of Japanese on the island. The almost superhuman act of heroism would result in Paige receiving the Medal of Honor. It was a dramatic reminder of his mother's advice to always trust in God. The prize on the island was Henderson Field, Control meant air superiority in the South Pacific, but the Marines only occupied a small part of the island, and they were without reinforcements and greatly outnumbered. To make matters worse, the Japanese had added more soldiers and were closing in.
They were hitting our lines here, then there, and there, just trying to break through, and fortunately our Marines were able to hold off.
Paige was ordered to the west side of the airfield. He was to set up his machine guns on a ridge which he was told might be the route the enemy would hit next. He had only 33 men in his platoon. The Japanese had between 2,500 and 3,000 moving toward the ridge. After midnight, on October the 26th, they attacked. For several hours, Paige directed the fire of his gunners. When everyone in his platoon had either been killed or wounded, he continued to fight alone.
By now, it was getting pretty close to daylight, and I didn't know for probably the last hour or two. I was the only Marine running back and forth firing these guns, and I was firing them, and men were bringing ammunition up and getting killed.
At dawn, as the Japanese persisted, Paige continued to fire. Then he picked up a red-hot machine gun and charged toward the enemy, calling for reinforcements to follow with bayonets. The Japanese retreated, leaving over 900 dead behind. Shortly after the battle, Paige picked up a small Bible which had fallen from his pack. It was open to Proverbs.
It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths." And I guess I was talking to myself, because the gunnery sergeant from George Company told me later on that he came over, and I had a little Bible in my hand. He says, "And you were talking to your mom." And he says, "Mom, Mom." And I remember the day, 6 years and 3 months before, when I left Camden Hill to join the Marines, when my mother says, "All I want you to do is trust in God. Don't try to figure out everything by yourself, and God will show you the way."
Paige and his wife, Marilyn, spend summers near Oceanside, California, and they're active in the Southwest Community Church in Palm Desert.
I know that the Congressional Medal of Honor is the highest award that can be bestowed on any American fighting man, but the greatest honor of all is to know in your heart that you have talked to God and asked God to take over the throne of your life. And that's what I've done.
When Joe Foss was growing up on a farm in South Dakota, he climbed a windmill at the age of 4 and had to be rescued. But that was only the beginning of his daring exploits and a love affair with anything that would take him high above the earth. As executive officer of a Marine fighter plane squadron, Foss and his crew flew out of Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, the same airfield Mitchell Paige was protecting when he received the Medal of Honor. As Paige fought on the ground, Foss was flying from the field to hit the enemy in the air, on the ground, and in the water, wherever he could find them. Foss is credited with shooting down 26 enemy planes, making him the #1 Marine ace in the war. His Medal of Honor citation states that he engaged in almost daily combat with the enemy between October the 9th and November the 19th, 1942. In combat much like this, he downed 23 planes in that time period, and in January of 1943, he added 3 more to his list.
I say that God saved me over and over and over. I have no excuse for being here. There's no excuse in the world. If it hadn't been that the Lord, as I say, was saving me for later duty.
It was a potential Japanese attack that could have destroyed Henderson Field that gained Foss his greatest recognition. An armada of Japanese bombers and fighters was headed for Henderson when Foss discovered them between layers of clouds. With only 12 planes, he tricked the enemy into thinking they faced greater opposition. They turned without dropping a single bomb. His achievements at Guadalcanal made him a hero back home. In May of 1943, he and his mother were invited to the White House, where President Roosevelt presented him with the Medal of Honor. A month later, he appeared on the cover of Life magazine. His fame led him to friendships with celebrities like Bob Hope and Gary Cooper. When the war was over and the last Marine fighter planes had landed, Foss returned to South Dakota, but he remained in the spotlight. In the 1950s, he served 2 terms as governor of the state. In 1959, he was named commissioner of the newly formed American Football League. Along the way, he served as president of the National Society of Crippled Children and Adults and hosted 2 national television programs, The Outdoorsman and The American Sportsman. In 1966, when Foss and his wife Dee Dee were living in Scottsdale, Arizona, she convinced him to attend church. For the first time in his life, he felt God changing him, and gradually he gave God control.
We started a Bible study in our home, and another Bible study over at the country club, and I fought against that. Wasn't ready for that, but when he wrote the letters and I signed the letters and ended up in the first Bible study group we had there. I think 87 men showed up, found out that there are a lot of other people that want to know about the Lord.
But the Lord shall endure forever. He has prepared his throne for judgment. He shall judge the world in righteousness, and he shall...
Now, Bible study and sharing his faith consume much of Foss's time.
I will be glad and rejoice in you.
Every time that I ever give a speech, someone will ask the question, out of all the awards you've had and all the things in your life, what do you consider number 1? And I look them straight in the eye and say, the day I invited Jesus Christ into my life as my Lord and Savior. That's number 1.
Robert Maxwell was presented the Medal of Honor at a ceremony in Denver, Colorado in 1945. When a German grenade was thrown into his squad near Beikirch, France on September the 7th, 1944. He saved the lives of those around him by throwing his body on it, protected only by an army blanket.
All we got to do is wait for the fish to bite. That'll be sometime next week.
Bend, Oregon is a long way in both distance and time from that terrible night in France. These days, Maxwell's main objective in life is spending time with his family and serving his church.
Get the hook in the water. You can't catch fish unless you do.
When he went to war, Maxwell served as an Army communications technician in North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and France.
My responsibilities were laying wire with the rifle company that was in advance. Then when we took our objective, I would lay wire to each of the rifle companies, connect it back to the battalion headquarters.
Maxwell said he experienced many frightening instances, but did not have a great fear of war, that he trusted God. That trust was about to be put to the test as fighting raged in the nearby French countryside and night approached on September the 7th. Maxwell and 3 other soldiers, armed only with pistols, took up defensive positions outside the battalion observation post.
During the night, pitch dark, no moon, several hand grenades kept bouncing off the chicken wire fence that was above the stone wall that surrounded us. A hand grenade landed somewhere in the darkness. I thought it was at my feet. So my first reaction was to pick it up and throw it back, but I couldn't find it in the dark. After a couple of seconds elapsed, I finally decided that there's no hope left. So I just dropped, and I had my army blanket with me. And apparently I dropped on the grenade with my blanket covering it up, and it went off.
Maxwell was knocked unconscious. Though he received permanent injuries from the explosion, the lives of others nearby were saved.
Jesus taught in John 15:13, "Greater love has no man than this, that one lay down his life for his friends." Soldiers in wartime often lay down their lives for their friends. Jesus provided this example for us. Even though we offer this service of sacrifice, God often spares us and keeps us alive.
Not many Medal of Honor recipients have a park named after them. But in Chattanooga, Tennessee, children who know little about World War II splash and play in the Coolidge Riverside Park. It's named in honor of Charles H. Coolidge, who received the Medal of Honor for action in France in October of 1944. For Coolidge and his wife Frances, visits to the park are special.
I'm Miss Coolidge. I'm Gladys Meyer. Very nice to meet you.
It was good to see you again.
Nice to meet you. I'm a veteran myself.
I'm pleased that it's named after you.
That's an honor.
Coolidge was a seasoned veteran by the time he arrived on Hill 623 in France, where his Medal of Honor action occurred.
I was up on the front lines a considerable amount of time, but when we went in France on August the 15th of 1944, I stayed on the front line 133 straight days. But I always felt like that the Lord was protecting me. I never had to fear. I knew I had Mother back praying, and I knew I had my daddy praying, and I knew everybody at Second Presbyterian Church in Chattanooga was praying.
On October the 24th, Coolidge led his machine gun section and an attachment of rifles to occupy and hold Hill 623 in the Vosges Mountains of France. But then he spotted a large number of German soldiers approaching, and although outnumbered, he tried to bluff them.
So I told Ferguson, I said, "George, ask them if they want to give up."
The enemy not only declined, they opened fire.
Of course, we opened up fire with our .30 calibers, and the rifle company squad, they opened up with their M1s, and we repulsed them.
Coolidge stood and encouraged his men during several attacks until the fourth day. That's when a German tank pulled up next to him and stopped.
So the guy opened the turret of that tank and spoke better English than I did. And he said to me, he said, "Do you guys want to give up?" And I looked him right square in the face. I stood up and looked him right in the face, and I said, "I'm sorry, Mac, you got to come and get me." And I kind of pointed at myself, you know, like, "Come and get me if you think you can." And he put the turret of that tank down, and I got in behind a tree and laid on the ground, you know, and they fired point blank.
After the tank missed him 5 times, Coolidge tried to hit it with a bazooka, but the weapon failed. That's when the German infantry began to move in. He lobbed hand grenades toward them, taking a heavy toll, and then led a strategic withdrawal. When the battle was over, Coolidge was credited with killing 26 and wounding another 60 single-handedly.
It was on Hill 623 that I received or award for the Medal of Honor, which is the nation's highest military decoration. But it was not that hill that stood out so much to me as the hill on Calvary where Christ was crucified that promised us eternal life. It was the gift of His grace that if we believe in Him, we will have eternal life.
When Coolidge returned home, he was honored with a parade in which he rode with World War I's famed hero, Sergeant Alvin York. Stores closed at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and a big celebration was held after the parade. They even named a highway after him. Today, Coolidge is still actively involved in the family printing business. But more and more he spends time at Chattanooga's Medal of Honor Museum. Though he greatly admires his fellow recipients, he also remembers those never recognized.
But even I myself don't think of myself as a hero. I think I did a job and I had a job to do, but there are millions, and I mean literally millions of men and women that did terrific jobs during the war. That they never got medals, but they did jobs that if they weren't done, we wouldn't be here today.
There is another highway near Chattanooga named after a Medal of Honor recipient, and this soldier never fired a shot. Desmond Doss trained as an Army medical aid man, although he was officially classified as a conscientious objector. His Seventh-day Adventist faith would not permit him to kill another person, even in battle. Doss's Medal of Honor action came on Okinawa in 1945 as the Army swept across the rugged terrain in an effort to clear Japanese resistance. It covered a period of more than 3 weeks as he rescued the wounded and administered medical aid in the face of enemy fire. But the most dramatic incident took place when an assault was made on a jagged escarpment. A heavy concentration of enemy fire left approximately 75 casualties in an exposed area. Doss refused to take cover and remained under fire as he carried the wounded one by one to the edge of the escarpment and lowered them on a rope-supported litter.
And I just couldn't leave them. Even though they said they called me to come down, I wouldn't come down. I felt like I should not value my life above the value of that of my men. But I thought if I could just save one more man, it'd be worth getting wounded over. So I just kept praying, Lord, please help me get one more, and He did until I got all my men off.
He received his Medal of Honor from President Truman, and after the war returned to his home in Rising Fawn, Georgia, just south of Chattanooga. In 1959, he even received a surprise from a popular television show.
Desmond T. Doss of Rising Fawn, Georgia, World War II Congressional Medal of Honor winner, whose only weapons were his conscience and deep inner convictions. Tonight, this is your life. Desmond. Good to see you. That book's important to you. You carry that a lot, boy.
After many years, Doss and his wife Frances still live in their mountaintop home, and he remained strong in his faith, crediting God for saving his life and the lives of others during his Medal of Honor action.
I'm just thankful the Lord was able to use me as He did.
Right, that's real nice. That's nice.
Make a joyful shout to God, all the earth.
Rudy Hernandez of Fayetteville, North Carolina, has been living with battle injuries for almost half a century now.
Praise glorious.
After action in Korea one night in May of 1951, he was so badly wounded that he was placed in a body bag and loaded on a truck with the battle casualties.
They shall sing praise.
Only when someone saw his hand move did they determine that he was still alive. Hernandez was in charge of an infantry squad, and he had been in Korea long enough to learn how to fight. But nothing prepared him for the ruthless enemy attack in the early morning hours of April the 14th. As the North Koreans charged toward his unit, he and his buddy switched places. A second later, his friend was killed.
And no sooner had he taken my place than he got hit and that bullet was meant for me.
American soldiers who were running out of ammunition began to withdraw, all except one. Hernandez continued firing until his rifle jammed, but that didn't stop him.
I put my bayonet in my rifle, and I counterattacked.
Although wounded, Hernandez charged down the hill with his bayonet. Before he fell, he had killed 6 of the enemy and halted the advance until his unit could counterattack. But his wife, Denzel, says he paid a heavy price.
Make his praise glorious.
He was paralyzed on his right side. He had to learn how to speak, how to walk. He couldn't swallow, and he was unconscious for a month.
All the earth shall worship you.
Well, I think God spared his life that he might be a testimony, a living testimony of proof that there's still a God in heaven that watches over us, that there was an angel watching over him that day that took care of him and left him here on this earth to be a witness to other people.
In Vietnam, there was a code name for the medevac helicopters that flew countless missions day and night in all kinds of weather to carry the wounded to field hospitals. They called them dust-off. But to the men whose lives were being saved, they must have seemed like angels swooping down into the battlefields to lift them up and give them another chance at life.
This is Rebel 6, request dust-off. Dust-off, over.
Medal of Honor recipient Patrick Brady is a legend in the annals of medevac rescue pilots. During 2 tours of duty, he flew over 5,000 wounded men to safety, often when landing zones were obscured by smoke or fog, or were under fire and no one else would go in. Brady developed flying techniques that were daring and innovative, including flying sideways up a mountain to blow away heavy fog to get to wounded men.
For me in combat, my faith was a substitute for fear. It gave me confidence to do things that for me would have otherwise been impossible. So everything I ever accomplished in combat was a result of my faith, because I never truly experienced fear. I would be so embarrassed to think that I would come home and leave somebody out there who might die, and I had not done everything. And in fact, I never did leave anybody out there.
The President of the United States of America.
President Nixon presented the Medal of Honor to Brady on October the 9th in 1969. His Medal of Honor citation explains that during intense fog, smoke, and gunfire, he continued to fly ambulance helicopters, mission after mission, evacuating the wounded from a landing zone where others had been shot down. So severe was the battle and the destruction to his own aircraft, he had to use 3 different helicopters to evacuate 51 seriously wounded men. And throughout the day, he used the techniques he had developed to fly into battle areas and heavy fog.
God, through me, found a way, because he may have wanted those people that we saved to do some other things before they died. It has to come with, with competition, never wanting to give up. With faith, knowing that you're doing what's right, and that you would want somebody to do that same effort for you or for your wife or for your children or for someone you love. And with all that going for you, you're going to find a way. Just that simple. You are going to find a way, and you will not fail.
When Brady retired from the Army, he was a general assigned to the Presidio in San Francisco. Today, he and his wife live on a lake in Washington State, within the shadow of Mount Rainier. And there's one place nearby that draws him frequently.
A reading from the book of Numbers. You know, when I think of where I came from and what I had and what God's given me in my life, it's a good habit just to say thanks with a part of every day for all the good deals that I've had in my lifetime.
At night when the dew fell upon the camp, the manna...
I don't know what he's got in mind for me now, but the fact that he allowed me to be a party to saving as many lives as I did, to participate in that, it was a blessing that I can't imagine.
In Rochester, New York, there is a place very special to Gary Beikirch. It's a Vietnam Veterans Memorial Park. And lining the walkways are the names of every man and woman from that area who died in Vietnam. Beikirch and his wife Lolly come here often because some of his friends lost their lives in Vietnam, and his own life was changed forever while serving there. Action on April the 1st in 1970 made him a Medal of Honor recipient. Beikirch was a medic with the Green Berets in a camp near Cambodia, where he taught Mountain Yard tribesmen medical skills.
They were highly, highly principled and valued each other so much. There was a loyalty that they had to one another and to the people that loved them. And there was a tremendous bond that developed between them and the Special Forces soldiers.
But it all ended early one morning when the Viet Cong launched an intense and devastating attack. Beikirch moved through heavy fire with disregard for his own safety to treat the wounded. Beikirch was wounded twice and unable to walk, but refused treatment. He asked two Mountain Yard friends to carry him as he searched for other injured.
And so Tot and Dale then carried me around as we just helped people, dragging them down the medical bunker, going back out, getting more people, bringing them down there.
When they heard an incoming rocket, one of Beikirch's friends, 15-year-old Deo, shielded him from further injury but lost his own life in the process. When it was all over, a medevac helicopter took Beikirch to a hospital.
During this time, it was a period of about 7 days that I was in and out of consciousness. There was a chaplain who had been coming by, and one of the times that I woke up, he was there. And he said, "Glad to see you're awake." And he told me he'd been praying for me every day. And he said, "Would you like to pray?" And I said, "I don't know how to pray. I don't even know who to pray to." And he said, "That's okay, because God knows how to listen to you, and he knows you're here."
After a year in the hospital and a return to civilian life, Beikirch became a Christian and entered a seminary, determined to return to Vietnam as a missionary. But the war left him emotionally scarred, to the point that he moved to a cave in New Hampshire and let his hair grow below his shoulders while pursuing his studies. When the military finally located him to tell him he was a Medal of Honor recipient and that he was invited to Washington for the presentation, things began to change, including a haircut.
That's his room right there.
Following a White House ceremony, Beikirch returned to complete his seminary degree and add another in sociology and psychology, and then a master's in counseling. He also decided that God wanted him to help children. And for several years, he's worked as a school counselor in a Rochester middle school.
I've given you some help. We're trying to put this together. So I've been there now for 11 years, working with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. Now you're on your own. See if you can get the last two pieces. Trying to show them that there are things that are important, that there are things that you can have in your life that can provide a direction. I am right where God wants me. You're going to seem sometimes like next year that you're going to be on Earth. Next year.
In Little Rock, Arkansas, Medal of Honor recipient Nick Bacon takes his job seriously. He's the state director of Veterans Affairs, and one of his jobs is to see that men and women who have served their country get benefits that are available to them. He's also commandant of the state veterans' home. Bacon was a staff sergeant on August the 26th, 1968, the day his Medal of Honor action took place. Some battles in Vietnam were brief, and others, like the one Bacon was involved in, were all-day struggles. When his platoon lieutenant was wounded by machine gun fire, Bacon assumed command and led an assault, single-handedly eliminating the gun crew. When the leader of another platoon was hit, Bacon also took command of that platoon and continued to fight. When an explosion blew him into a hole, he began to pray.
My prayer wasn't that God made me a great hero or that I became a John Wayne annihilated enemy. It was that I would have the courage to get out of that hole and do what was right, and that I die like a man.
Bacon jumped from the hole and used hand grenades to hit more of the enemy and silence an anti-tank weapon. He then climbed up on the exposed deck of a tank and directed fire while wounded were evacuated.
And the prayers I did in that hole was what motivated me or gave me the courage and energies to come out of the hole. And I was convinced God was with us the whole day. As he was many days, but this day specifically, his hand was mighty and his protection was great. It was a wonderful show of God's power to see things turn around like that when you would think they were impossible.
Bacon was flown to Washington for the Medal of Honor ceremony with President Nixon.
But I never felt like a hero. I felt like all of them were heroes. All of those that kept firing and kept fighting, and I wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for them.
One of the many responsibilities Bacon has these days is overseeing the Arkansas Veterans Home, a residential facility for older veterans.
Well, you've been anchored in the right place for a long time. How old are you now?
93 years old, and I'll be 94 in October.
93. And they really, I think, are really happy there. We take them out on fishing trips. We throw birthday parties for them and have Christmas parties and things of that nature, and they're our family. So you're one of the Screaming Eagles. You paid your dues, didn't you? I work close with the veterans organizations, do a lot of traveling, takes away a lot of my weekends. But it's one of the few jobs that I believe that a person can have that loves their country, that loves the veterans. It's a job of complete satisfaction. This is a nice place to live, isn't it? They take good care of you, don't they? You know, God can use you in so many ways. He can use you in a job like this, taking care of veterans and their widows. As long as you're breathing and as long as you're able, God still has a plan for your life. It's something good for y'all to be able to see each other. God takes care of everything if we let him. See you later, Mr. Powell. All right, you take care, and I'll see you soon.
A leisurely stroll is something most folks take for granted. But for Leo Thorsness, it's sheer luxury. For years, his walking was confined to a 6-by-6-foot cell. And for extended periods, his legs were in stocks in a North Vietnamese prison.
Good, good.
Thorsness and his wife, Gailey, take frequent walks near their Alexandria, Virginia townhouse. However, his preferred method of travel in 1967 was an F-105 Air Force jet. That's when his bravery resulted in a Medal of Honor, though he would be shot down and captured before he received the news. Thorsness loved flying the two-man F-105s known as Wild Weasels. His job was to knock out North Vietnamese surface-to-air missile sites. On April the 19th, he and his wingman destroyed 2 of the sites. But his wingman's plane was hit, and both the pilot and navigator ejected. As Thorsness called for search and rescue, he destroyed an enemy MiG closing in on the 2 parachutes. By then he was low on fuel and had to reach a tanker, but suddenly the rescue helicopters were threatened.
There was nobody available to come back in with me, and so Harry and I made the decision, my backseater and I, made the decision, we'll go in, that's our job, direct the rescue. And someone wrote, we took on all of North Vietnam military. That wasn't our goal. Our goal was just help rescue the fellow. But anyway, we did get in there, and we flew right between. There were a bunch of MiGs just orbiting, waiting for some dummy to come back in. And we ended up right in the middle of them. I say we surrounded 5 MiGs. And one of them, he flew into my gun sight, so I hosed it, and he started coming apart, but I was out of gun film, so it was probable.
As Thorsness headed for a tanker, another plane desperately needed fuel. And Thorsness gave up his place in line and began to ease his plane toward a base in Thailand. Just as he landed, he ran out of fuel. When the day ended, another chapter had been added to Medal of Honor history. 11 days later, he wasn't so lucky. His plane was hit by a missile. As he and his backseat navigator ejected, he began to wonder how his family would take the news.
And the thought that went through me, a statement was, Leo, you're going to make it. Leo, you're going to make it. Just over and over. And I liked that statement. And there's no doubt the Lord put that in my mind and gave me the courage or the strength or the faith or whatever it was. But it was there. And we were captured, of course.
On that day, Thorsness became another kind of hero. He joined American POWs in North Vietnam who were heroes because of their courage and patriotism as they endured torture and isolation.
I spent 7.5 years, almost all of it in Hanoi. 4 of those years were in solitary confinement. 10 months was in a blacked out, completely black cell. All efforts of the Vietnamese to break me and use me because I was, for the most part, the senior ranking officer. But had it not been for my strong faith in God, not just faith, but knowledge that He was real, He was taking care of me and taking care of my family, I wouldn't have made it.
They didn't begin torture until October. I heard about it and chilled because we'd all been fearing that they might get around to that, which they did for over 4 years.
They laid me on made me lay down on that concrete bunk and lifted the stocks and put my legs in them and locked them down and like the old Pilgrim Day stocks, but you don't move. And they left me there for 72 days. They'd bring food in, but a lot of times taunt you with it and keep it just far enough from you to where you couldn't reach it.
I'm honored to be a Medal of Honor recipient, but that was given while I was in combat, not for a prisoner. And I found it's much easier to be brave strapped to an airplane than it is strapped to a torture cell.
Jeremiah Denton gained attention in April of 1966 during an interview arranged by the North Vietnamese with a Japanese TV reporter. Before the interview, he was tortured in an attempt to force him to condemn U.S. policy. When asked the question by the reporter, he replied,
"Well, whatever the position of my government is, I believe in it. Yes, sir. I'm a member of that government, and it is my job to support it, and I will as long as I live."
Denton not only defied the North Vietnamese with his words, he consistently blinked torture in Morse code into the camera. Naval intelligence detected it, and it was the first confirmation that American POWs were being tortured. But no one knew that Denton and Reisner had prayed all night prior to the interview. Both decided he should appear on camera, but say the opposite of what their captors wanted. For defying them, Denton was severely tortured again. In December of 1970, many of the POWs were moved from isolation to a larger part of the prison, and as many as 47 men were placed in a room together, and on Sundays, they began having church.
So we decided we would hold church next Sunday. We would tell them, not a problem, but we're going to hold church whatever you do. And we appointed a chaplain, and the senior ranking officer said okay, and he approved all this, and it's got to be that way. And 5 people said, I'll be in the choir, so we had a choir.
We sang Onward Christian Soldiers. Then we had the thought for the day, and this young man had a tremendous recall, the volunteer chaplain, of the Bible, and he gave some scripture verses. And then we had the benediction, but before we had finished, the guard had heard us and came in and shouted, "Shut mouth, sit down."
We kept it up, and I guess after about a month, they finally came in one night and took all the senior officers out, about 20 or 25 of them, and put them in 2 or 3 to those small cells. And we got up in the windows and started singing God Bless America, Battle Hymn of the Republic, and songs of that magnitude.
Then we sang the Star Spangled Banner, and you could hear it probably in South Vietnam. And they came in with their machine guns and started knocking guys around.
Well, from inside came the words to the Star Spangled Banner. I wish you could have heard it. What a wonderful sound it was. And they sang at the top of their voices and went over the wall in downtown Hanoi. "Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?" And if they were saying to us, "We're with you, guys. We're with you."
And the next day, the camp commander got on the loudspeaker, which played all the time, and said, "The camp authorizes you a church service every Sunday." How about that? There's only one person that can make that happen. That's the Lord.
In the early part of 1973, it finally happened. With the signing of the Paris Peace Accord, U.S. transport jets began arriving at the Hanoi airport to take the POWs home.
Now, normally fighter pilots looks down their nose at cargo plane pilots, you know. But this day was C-141 with a Red Cross on the tail, and it came in. Beautiful, beautiful airplane. Came in and landed there. I think there were 3 of them came in and landed. And they began to read our names off. And they had an American colonel standing just across the line, painted, and he was there to shake our hand. And when I shook his hand and looked up as an old friend of mine, and we just grabbed each other and hugged each other. And then we all went to the airplanes.
And we marched up, and they called out our name. We marched up, and we saluted the colonel, and we were transferred to American control.
And then we started the takeoff roll. I remember the vibration, and then when the vibration stopped, it meant we were airborne, the gear was coming up.
And the instant we broke ground, that was our assurance that we felt it is true, we're going home. And the airplane just erupted. You know, backslapping and congratulations and thank you, Lord, and amen. It was a true celebration of the deepest emotions that I can't describe. So it was a wonderful time.
You don't know what you've lost until you lose your freedom. The guy left a saying on the wall there in Hanoi that says, "Freedom has a taste to those who fight and almost die, that the protected will never know."
When the first group of POWs arrived at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines on February the 12th of 1973, there was a tremendous welcome. Denton was selected to speak.
We are honored to have the opportunity to serve our country under difficult circumstances. We are profoundly grateful to our Commander-in-Chief and to our nation for this day. God bless America.
Jeremiah Denton served in the United States Senate from his home state of Alabama. Now retired, he lives near Mobile. Sam Johnson retired from the Air Force in 1979 and settled in Plano, Texas. In 1991, he was elected to Congress. Robinson Reisner was promoted to Brigadier General before he retired. He and his wife now live in Austin, Texas. Leo Thorsness received his Medal of Honor in a ceremony with President Nixon. Faith remains the most important thing in Thorsness's life. And he and his wife are active in the downtown Baptist Church of Alexandria, Virginia.
We're just very much at home in this church, and most of our friends are from that church. It's a church that we fit, and it's a good, solid, Bible-believing church.
And for Thorsness, the Medal of Honor will always be a significant part of his life.
Even though I was given for, in my case, a few hours of work, I feel that I can't let it down. But my life is affected, and I try to be a better person because of it.
Courage, patriotism, faith in God, values cherished by those we've seen. But who are these heroes who've exhibited such bravery? Not long ago, they were kids in a ballpark or at work on the family farm. They were teenagers showing off their first car or a youngster sacking groceries. Then suddenly, they were men going off to war, giving above and beyond the call of duty so that we might have the freedoms we now enjoy. Men of faith, honor, valor.